So I had an idea. I'm going to take a look at 4 different CD versions of Primal Rage. Jaguar CD, 3DO, Sega Saturn, and PlayStation. Now I'm not the biggest Primal Rage fan, but hey, Mortal Kombat wasn't on all 4 systems, so I gotta work with what I got. Firstly, I'm going to look at the Atari Jaguar CD version. So the Atari Jaguar was a pretty powerful system for its time, but it had a pretty high price tag. It was $250, and it didn't have a whole lot of great games. Well, in fact, it has very few good games. You know, go ahead and scratch that. It has few games altogether. But it still dominated like 1% of the market, and considering it's a failure, it made me wonder why they went ahead and released the Jaguar CD. So the Jaguar CD was a $150 add-on that went on top of the console, basically the same thing as the Sega CD. I don't believe the unit improved the graphics at all though. I believe it was just a CD add-on. I could be wrong though, so if anyone knows, just go ahead and let me know. So to play this version of Primal Rage, you needed the Jaguar and the Jaguar CD unit. So that's like $400 worth of hardware, and you still aren't quite getting the arcade experience. However, this is a much better experience than the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and 32X version. I mean, the color is a lot more vivid, there's a lot more detail, the characters are larger, so yeah, it's a much better experience than those ones. One thing to consider though, it is using a CD, so it's pretty much limitless storage to try to bring Primal Rage over to the console. I was a little disappointed because I was under the misconception that the Atari Jaguar was a much more powerful system than it really was. So I read a quote from Wikipedia. Apparently a CEO at Atari said that the Jaguar was more powerful than the Sega Saturn, but slightly less powerful than the Sony PlayStation. I mean, from looking at this game alone, the first thing that comes to mind is bullshit. When I get to the Sega Saturn version, you're going to see it looks much better. So anyway, if you ever read crap saying that Primal Rage for the Jaguar is one of the best versions, it's definitely not. And like I said, it's better than the 16-bit ports and the 32X port, but why wouldn't it be? And now I'm going to move on to the 3DO version. Now the 3DO version actually had movies in it, which we also saw in the Sega Saturn version. Now I didn't record the audio, so I'm going to show you the intro with some good old-fashioned metal I put under it. So yeah, those movies are pretty lame. And the funny thing is they didn't put them in the Jaguar CD version, which I think is kind of funny because it was a CD system and it could do movies. So go figure. And also the PlayStation version has the intro, but it doesn't have any of the other movies in between battles. Only the Sega Saturn and the 3DO version has all the movies in it. The quality of the movies are just so low though, I really don't give a shit. And by the way, I should mention, all of these games play and run very smooth, but due to my recording software, and depending how the emulator works, sometimes the video might be a little more choppy, but they all run smooth. Now the 3DO version is essentially no different. I mean, not too many differences I can find in this version between the Jaguar version. Visually they look exactly the same, and of course the only differences are these movies. As far as I'm aware, the tech specs in the 3DO and the Jaguar are pretty much the same. They both have like 2 megs of RAM, and I think the processors are about the same speed. Of course the Jaguar is 64 bits, but I don't know if that ever comes into play. So I really don't have much to say about this game. I mean, I described to you the Jaguar version, and this one's really no different. I will tell you this though, the 3DO was expensive as shit. If you're not aware, it was like a $700 console. I believe it was sold as a multimedia machine essentially, you know, it played movies, pictures, music, all that bullshit. So they felt $700 was an appropriate price. Now, according to Wikipedia, the 3DO sold 6 million units, which is pretty good I think, considering at $700 a pop, I'm surprised they broke 1 million. And with that said, I was still pretty disappointed with the game because I mean at $700 fucking dollars, can I at least get the arcade perfect experience? Still not quite though. But if you want my opinion, the 3DO was definitely much better than the Jaguar. I think most people would agree considering that it had more than 30 games and it also had a Street Fighter, which is one of the best fighting games you're going to find, period. Actually, the 3DO even had a really good version of Samurai Showdown. So I don't know what the hell was going on with Atari, but they just were not getting any good fighting games on that Jaguar. So yeah, even the Nintendo 64 had better fighting games than the Jaguar, and it can't say that very often. Now moving on, let's go ahead and get into the Sega Saturn port of Primal Rage. So jumping into this, I didn't even really care. I was just like, alright, well this is going to be exactly like the 3DO or Jaguar version. Even has the movies here from the 3DO. And then to my surprise, getting into the game, the graphics look just way better. And as I said, I read that the 3DO and the Jaguar version look much better. But, I mean, having played them all myself now, I can definitely tell you the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation version look much better than those ports. I mean, where do I start? Essentially, it's now like they grabbed the arcade game and just lowered the quality just a bit. To me, it appears that the color just isn't quite as vivid and the characters are a little bit more pixelated, but other than that, it looks great. In fact, I'm not really a Primal Rage fan, but having played the Saturn and the PlayStation version again, the game is somewhat enjoyable. I mean, I could definitely get into this more than those other versions. You really just gotta play the arcade or one of these 32-bit versions. However, I'd be lying if I said I was really gonna sit down, play these games, learn the moves and all that bullshit. It still just has too many problems for me to enjoy. But if you are a Primal Rage fan, definitely the best way to go is either Saturn, PlayStation, or arcade. And of course, it's just undeniable that the arcade version is really the best version. But if you go with the Saturn and the PlayStation, you're still getting a really great experience. And of course, this game was also released a part of the Midway Classic series. And I believe that should be arcade perfect, but I haven't played them myself. So considering I'm pretty much just out of shit to say about Primal Rage, let me tell you about the emulation. So I used the Jaguar version on the Project Tempest emulator, and it's pretty much emulated perfectly. Really, I didn't see any bugs other than an occasional graphic problem, but, you know, it plays fine. By the way, this is the PlayStation version of Primal Rage, which you're gonna see is pretty much exactly like the Sega Saturn version. But anyways, back to emulation. Now for the Jaguar, I used the FreeDO emulator, and as far as I could tell, the emulation was perfect on that. For the Sega Saturn version of Primal Rage, I used the SSF emulator, and I saw a few graphic problems with that version. Chaos and Diablo seem to have some garbage on them, but other than that, they played just fine. And as far as the PlayStation version, which you're seeing right now, and is only choppy because of the footage I have, I used an emulator called PSX. However, I imagine this game is going to work perfectly in other emulators like EPSXE and EmuRaiden. So if you want to emulate a console version, I think the PlayStation is the best way to go. But if you can already emulate the arcade game, I would just stick with that. But anyway, if the point was lost in this review, it's just I wanted to compare the Jaguar, 3DO, Saturn, and PlayStation version of this game. And I really got the idea when I played the Jaguar and the 3DO version because I was really under the misconception that they were better. Anyway, that was a little education in retro gaming. And that's all for now, so until next time, I'll see you guys around.